Hello, I'm Jan McVarish, Education and Events Director of the Free Speech Union. Welcome to the over 200 Free Speech Union members who are joining us live for tonight's online event. It's called Coming Back from Cancellation with my guest Kate Clanchy, who I'll introduce in a moment. We'll also be releasing this on YouTube and the usual platforms as an episode of the That's Debatable podcast. So those of you joining live can post questions in the Q&A box, and I'll do my best to put those to the guest tonight. So to introduce Kate Clanchy. Kate, over a 25-year writing career, won a Forward Prize for Poetry, a Somerset Maugham Award, a Saltire Award, the National Short Story Prize, the V.S. Pritchett Award, and the Writers Guild Award, amongst many others.
And the Orwell Prize.
And the Orwell, well, I was going to come to that. Through that time, Kate also worked as a school teacher in Scotland and in England, and developed a specialised expertise in helping children from all backgrounds express themselves through poetry. And it's this aspect of her work that was reflected in England Poems from a School, and that which was an anthology of her school pupils' poetry, published in 2018 to great acclaim. And later, in 2019, she published a best-selling teaching memoir, Some Kids I Taught and What They Taught Me. And this was the book that won the Orwell Prize in 2020. Now, many FSU members will be aware of what happened next. And indeed, we've spoken about it before at an event that we held at the Hippodrome when Jenny Lindsay's book Hounded was launched, and we had a conversation with you included about the issues within publishing. But what we'll focus on tonight is an extraordinary story, really, that's happened to you, Kate. And it's almost like there's a whole arc now that wasn't there when we discussed it at the Hippodrome. So as people might know, Kate and her book fell victim to what I think is one of the most public and aggressive cancellations in the cultural world. And what happened was that in an onslaught of increasingly vicious attacks, online critics accused her book and Kate herself of racism and ablism, and that provoked an unprecedented pile-on, fuelled, I think, by the BLM moment and taking place in the context of COVID lockdowns. And despite a few people coming to her defence, notably Philip Pullman, the author of his Dark Materials, amongst many other books, and also many of the former pupils that Kate describes in her book, Kate's publisher of 25 years, Picador, failed to stand by their author. Now, as I said, Kate's spoken about this before, and she's luckily now, I think, because of the efforts she's taken to fight back, has now been given back a voice that I think is a much more reasonable one than the one for which you were caricatured. But we've asked Kate to return because her story features in a new 7-part podcast called Anatomy of a Cancellation, which I'm hoping quite a lot of you will have listened to. And it's received critical acclaim for its in-depth analysis of the whole affair from beginning to, well, what hopefully now is the end, who knows. And it offers a really fascinating timeline of how a witch hunt gathers pace, how a storm builds, and how it might eventually pass. And the series includes interviews with the key players in Kate's cancellation, Kate herself and her tormentors. And it's really fascinating because it provides insights into the motivations and the sort of larger social dynamics and the political context that can shape a cancellation and shape this particular cancellation. And this month, last month actually, November, there has been a public apology from your publisher, Pan Macmillan. And really there's a whole series of apologies and non-apologies throughout this whole story. So, Kate, I really want to thank you for coming in, and congratulations on the series. I mean, we'll find out what you think about it. But for anyone who's listened to the Free Press's series, The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, Anatomy of a Cancellation, which is produced by the BBC, which some of you will have mixed feelings about, but it's a very, very high quality podcast that is the best that the BBC can do. And it's a really fascinating example of British cancel culture at its worst, I would say. So, Kate, the first question I wanted to ask you was, I think one of the big ones that came to me when I was listening to the podcast and also when I was reading your book was, where does some of your critics say, well, we're just exercising free speech? And given this is the Free Speech Union podcast, where does free speech begin and legitimate criticism of a literary work, where should that be? And when does that tip over into a kind of cancellation campaign? Is it clear to you where the line is?
There's different lines. I mean, it's free speech to say somebody's a cow on WhatsApp, but it starts to become a cancellation campaign when you start to get them to make them lose their jobs. So, I mean, I think this was in a way a sort of public workplace mobbing of the kind that I think happens in many places. I mean, you know, it's social justice, HR, except, I mean, I wasn't a proper employee, but this kind of thing happens. It happens in a lot of places. And I think, you know, free speeches, you should be able to say what you like. But cancellation is when you use the new things that have been brought to us by social media to destroy somebody's professional life. And that's what was done. You know, they targeted my publisher, and my publisher did something they've never done to any writer before. They apologised for me without even telling me. Mm-hmm. And they apologised for my racism. And that really, and what nobody noticed or cared at all, was that destroyed my true professional life, which is as a teacher. My record was immaculate. There's no stains, no complaints on it, whatever. And they didn't even consider that when they ran a Coach and Horses through it.
And do you think that was the intent?
What, for Picador?
No, from the people who went for you.
I think that they were people who wanted. I think there's lots of reasons to destroy my project. It was destroyed by people with personal, professional interests. The campaign was organised by people who worked in a similar field. My project in my school was there for 10 years. I worked with lots and lots of different agencies. I worked at it very hard. I'm an experienced teacher. I made it work. And those poems were publicly there. Everyone could see how good they were. I had a book about how to write a poem that was doing really well. I think I was simply annoying to people who wanted to have success in the same area, and that's who orchestrated it. I would say it probably got out of hand. I think they probably didn't expect it to be as big as it was. They thought they could probably just throw some shade, be aggressive, make sure I didn't get the next job. They would. I don't expect anyone, you know, thought this would happen. I don't think people do. I mean, I don't think Iago thought that Desdemona would actually be dead. Mm-hmm. I don't think anyone thought that they were going to hurt my students in the same way at all.
But what comes through in the podcast is with the repetition in the podcast of the tweets that were being written about you in criticism. So it starts with a few critical comments on Goodreads, and then it grows and that is amplified on Twitter in particular. And it's almost as though being right, so the criticism from your peers or alleged peers is because it's almost like because they're writers, it gives them cover to suggest that this is legitimate literary criticism, whereas actually it is a campaign against your person and your personhood in the world and your standing, which that's where the viciousness comes in. But do you think, I mean, do you think that within the literary world there's always been this viciousness and jealousy?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I mean, poets have always been absolutely dreadful to each other, but they did it behind the scenes.
Right.
I think it's the everything coming together, and then you get traditions which are, you know, we have free speech in academia for good reasons. Academic, but also academics are used to their discourse being private. So, and academics like to be unsettled, or they like to find some degree of racism in a text that you get good marks for that, you get an A for that. So that impulse to you found a degree of racism, then you overstate it massively and you say it's part of a huge colonialist project. That's kind of good academic practice. What happened with me was somebody wrote an essay in lockdown that was written on those academic rules that accused me of being in an imperialist, colonialist mem sahib, or just some of the words that were in there. Didn't actually quote any of the poems on the grounds that they were too terrible to quote. I think because it was done on Amazon Sample and they would be more expensive to download them. But so you started with that essay, and then that was repeated in the new forum of Goodreads, which is that dangerous thing, Anonymous. So the person who repeated bits from that essay added things I'd never wrote, like Jewish nose and slanty eyes. Other coordinated ones were written with it that said that I'd named my students and other such absolute libelous nonsense. But that person claimed to be a teacher, which they were not. So, they were... and a lot of the idea was that you shouldn't criticise the poor, honest reviewer on Goodreads. But they have the power. I was the named person working in my professional life under that name. Anonymous people were able to libel me in my professional life. It wasn't literary criticism with absolute impunity.
Well, the language used is extraordinary. So by the time it spills onto social media, I mean, I'm not going to say the words that people wrote about you because it's properly really vulgar, and yet these are people who supposedly are writers. So the three women in particular who are the ones that are focused on in the podcast, all of whom are published writers, and one of them is an academic, supposedly. But the language that they're using in their tweets, I mean, you wouldn't use that in an academic conference. So they're even in academia, where it has these similar trends of deprofessionalisation have also entered, and very personal attacks have entered, as we can see with what happened to Kathleen Stock. Nevertheless, within the professional environment of a seminar room or a conference, there's no way somebody would be as abusive as these women were to you online. But they didn't hide their identities. It wasn't anonymous. So why do you think they didn't think it would play badly for them?
Well, I think they didn't play badly for them. They garnered great power from it. So, for example, Professor Sunny Singh started an online competition to make fun of my tears using cheese, food and sexual metaphors, because The Guardian had published an interview. Both my parents died in COVID, and when The Guardian came to interview me, I just emptied the house and I had a mug with my mother's face on it. And The Guardian included that detail. And Sunny Singh announced that this was something that because I'd used chocolate skin, it would be a good idea for people to join in a competition to make fun of my grief, effectively. And so there were lots of academics lined up to do this, about my blancmange thighs and my weepy tears. Lots of them, they thought it was hilarious. It's still there on Twitter. So that was the language of academia being used, I think, in a profoundly indecent way. I think that somebody who starts that, or somebody who responds to that, has become depraved. They've lost sight of really ordinary decencies. People wouldn't do that anywhere in the world or anywhere across history in public. It's a truly disgraceful thing that happened. But then the consequence of that for her was that she was made a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature the next month. And there was a big party to celebrate, and the chair of the Royal Society of Literature, his opening joke was that he said I was all blushing, all chocolatey, so that everyone would have a laugh at me and be joined in that thing. So it was a true, a public shaming and a public scapegoating and a choosing of somebody to dehumanise and disgrace them as much as they possibly could. And, I'm familiar with those kind of things. I'm a school teacher. But I do think it disgraces professionalism and disgraces academia that happened,
And so that glee, and then as the momentum builds, the way in which you can see the cowards jumping on the juggernaut was very evident at the time. And I remember when first reading about it, because it did cross into mainstream awareness. It was something that I think journalists and writers would have paid attention to, and media figures, because they would know that it could be them next. So there's kind of lessons there, but also that tendency then to not be the next one, the next victim, to kind of to pin your colours to the right mast that suits you best at that particular time. But at the same time, presumably being very fearful that it could well be you, because damn well you've used, there will be something that you've said or words that you've used that can be turned against you. So this kind of very unpoetic language that's used against you in the name of criticising the language that you use, I mean, can you get your head around that? Because they accuse you of dehumanising the students that you worked with. even though I think the work really humanises teenagers who otherwise don't get humanised very often. They're often seen by all sides.
Seen very often.
No, they don't get seen because they're tucked away in schools. Yeah. And then when they get talked about, they're often talked about by all sides as being, troublesome, disgusting, a disappointment, it's the failed generation or whatever. And I think all sides do that at the moment. And what was really refreshing about the book was that you rehumanised teenagers in a very individual way, and what they were criticising you for was stereotyping, and it's like it's very blunt.
It's the opposite of stereotyping.
It is very peculiar, isn't it? And it was almost like what I would think of as school level criticism. Oh, it's a stereotype. It's a stereotype. Just because you make some reference to somebody's appearance or their ethnicity or something like that, it's automatically read as a stereotype, whereas actually there's something there about people's physical existence.
Well, schools are very physical places. I mean, if you remember being a teenager, your parents will almost certainly have preoccupied you. And it's one of the things that happens in a school. Somebody goes away, a short 11-year-old, they come back in the summer, and sometimes they're the most beautiful person you've ever seen in your life. Or sometimes they've changed into something else. It's like being, having their uniforms handed out to them. People's appearances are handed to them in great drastic ways. And they're very important to them, and they're very important to each other. And I do make some of those things visible. I mean, there's a chapter at the end that's much criticised, which is about how extremely hard it is for girls to be beautiful, and how that attracts noise around them and, things that they can't control. And that sometimes they resort to destroying their own beauty. In fact, I've seen it happen quite a lot, that they don't want to stick out and they don't want this kind of abuse. So there is a chapter about that. And you can take out sentences from that and say, ooh, she said she was fat. Well, yes, I did. But you know what? That's a loving description of that girl. So that it happened over and over again that people would find half a sentence and represent that as the whole. And I think you can't get hung up on it, and you can't go, oh, I didn't write that, or, whatever. I think you have to stand up for all language and say, if you don't use nuance and you don't use irony and you don't use different colours, then you don't use good writing, and people aren't going to want to read it again. Yes, and then that's where freedom comes in, doesn't it? Because how can you be free to use language as you see fit and as you're responding to the world around you, or when you're reflecting on the thing you want to try to convey, if you're totally hidebound by fear? By not being able to see people. Yes, It's also about representing the self, really. I think that I'm fairly reckless with me in that book. The person that's most careless about is me. Quite a lot of what my sensitivity readers did was go through my text, find where I had a bad thought and jeer at me. Ooh, she said this. Well, yes, I did. And I put it down carefully so that you can see that I don't find this easy, that I am not a saint, that there is struggle and pain involved in all of these things. And I would do that again. I think that to represent yourself as a saint is one of the most dreary thing to do. Well, that's why I've never written anything anything personal, because you've got to be. I think there's a bravery to people who write in that way that certainly I absolutely lack, and I would never. But that's what I love to read. Yes, and I think that's why so many people like that book. And I think lots of people were hurt by the reception of it, actually, because it's very much a teacher's point of view book. People are very scornful about teachers, yet teachers do such important work. And I think teachers liked it because that's how they saw the world. And I think they felt, and one of the things I deal with a lot squarely is to say that teachers are looked down on, and they're not seen as upper middle class people. They're seen as lower middle class. I think the people are snobbish about teachers. And I think one of the things that was happening was elite scorning teachers. And saying, oh, you with your stereotyped ideas, you're keeping us all down. So many people have got grudges against teachers. And actually what I was trying to unfold was that, all the different nuances of what a teacher does in their day from the teacher's point of view. Yes, and I think you really capture the really complex relationships that have to take place between adults and teenagers in the school, and that the school isn't just about the kind of politics of education or the policy. There's always, no matter what's going on at education policy level, there's always these
these relationships that are of responsibility and authority that are always going to be very, very, very complicated. And what's and that does really come across, because I've done research with teenage girls, for example. One project I did, which was about teenage girls who didn't like sport, and we were trying to get them to do sport. And I know, as a mother of young children at the time when I did it, that it was actually genuinely really jarring to see these teenage girls who are not the ones who everybody loves because they're lithe and they're active and they're enthusiastic and they're beautiful. They were the girls that were lethargic and didn't want to do things and were deeply embarrassed, just as you say, in their physical bodies. And I don't think I could write about that. Because I don't know how to do that in a way that is.
But I think it was worth my trying.
Yes, exactly, and it was it really reminded me of my own reactions when I read about the way you talked about bodies, teenage bodies, but some people have said, oh well, she's sexualizing them or she's racializing them, and you think they are sexual and they have got different appearances based on partly where they come from, and so so this is I was asking you earlier about. There's this strange thing that in the social justice way of thinking, I don't know what else you want to call it, woke or whatever, there's this idea that, or a critique, they would say, of the racializing of bodies or the gendering of bodies or the way in which bodies are constructed through class. But there's a real fear about that actually being a reality, that people's bodies are not just all held in discourse up here somewhere. They're actually, there's a certain point, especially in the teenage years, it gets written into the body. So those social pressures that people are under, or the disappointments, when they're teenagers, that is when it becomes evident and manifest in the bodies that these young people develop, isn't it? And that's what you described.
So I was writing about poverty being written in the body. I mean, I taught in a school where our kids were shorter than the kids in the posher, just in the posher comprehensive, when we always knew we were going to lose when the sports teams came, because they were all taller. You know, that they just weren't well nourished enough. And you know, there's a chapter there about a girl who has to have most of her teeth out when she's still 15 because she's been so poorly cared for. You know, and that's shown as just something that's terribly, terribly sad, and it is real.
Yes,
you know, and it's not. And teachers have an embarrassed reaction to it. The child does. It's about pain and shame, and I try to get it on the page in a way that people can approach it. So it's not a statistic, it's somebody that you know by that time, and you can see that it's a real thing and that it exists, and it's something that we should be dealing with. You know, it's about trying to make things real.
Yes, and I suppose the children that you write about, in some kids I taught, there is a skew towards children who are from other countries. But you also do write about white working class kids as well.
Absolutely.
It's kind of interesting that people have picked up on, they've criticised you for racialising those who are from abroad and then sort of fat shaming or whatever it might be, the kids are from here. But there does seem to be a real lack of interest and lack of concern for those children and the physical state that sometimes lots of children end up in, because they are not well looked after, or because they're not they haven't got access to amenities. They're not the kind of glossy haired girls that I see where I live who've got perfect skin, inexplicably perfect skin at the age of 16, 17. You no longer see teenage girls with acne in wealthy areas of London, whereas if you go somewhere else, you do. Kids look like they used to look like when I grew up. And something's happened somehow where these teenage girls no longer look like that. They look like glossy kind of perfection, even though they're going through all of the hormonal things that teenagers have always gone through.
I don't know how it's achieved. But I mean, that thing about I said it to them, or I demeaned them. There's an awful lot of the language of criticising film actually was used in some kids, as if my book were a camera and I turned it on these subjects who were real people, or as if I'd written them a school report. But I did it with great care, so that when I was talking about painful things like this, I created very careful composite characters, And you can tell because nobody has ever complained or recognised themselves how much care I took, to blur them in time, to blur them in space, so that I was still saying true things, but in a way that people wouldn't recognise themselves.
Yeah, so the response, or the later response, the critical response to the book that led to was the mobbing, is incredibly literal, isn't it? So there's no sense that there's any space between you as writer and you as Kate, or that there's any space between the children who are composite characters, as you say, and actual children who exist in the world. So do you think there's a greater significance to that?
No, I think that was one of the most troublesome. I think when they launched it again, I don't think they realised how far it would go. But it really got to the point where my students were trying to write, because when they were said to be victims of abuse, their achievements were taken from them. That was a terrible thing to say about them. That was for them to say. And they didn't think that they were. So 25 of my students who had been in England Poems from a School, some of whom had very affectionate portraits of them in some kids which that they knew about, but others who knew that they were just, that they'd been taught by me and appreciated being in England Poems from a School, which was another book that was being demeaned, They wrote to the bookseller to say that they had no safeguarding and consent issues, and that they had been through, they wanted to speak for themselves. And my publisher was trying as hard as they could to stop them. So they closed the door on them. They refused to verify their identities. These were people that they'd published, but they refused to verify their identities. The person who was in charge of the letter didn't tell the senior people that the letter was happened. And as soon as the letter had been published, they worked as hard as they could to nullify the effect of it. I mean, it was really a terrible thing to do to young people. So undignified.
And in the name of?
In the name of racial justice, in the name of, in the name of inclusion, they demeaned and threw away the very real achievement of people from very unusual backgrounds.
And I think what I suddenly realised as I was listening to the podcast again, and it made me think about the book again, is that, of course, for you as a teacher who had been teaching for how long? 20 odd years?
Oh, a very long time. I'm about 100 now, yeah. So, 30 years, I think, yeah.
So the sheer number of young people that have come past your eyes and through your teaching, of course you're going to create composite characters, because that is how you can't possibly remember every single individual child, do you? And they kind of form into types when you deal with an awful lot of young people.
Yeah, but also I was also did it with care. I knew I wanted to write about certain things, and I worked carefully. You don't know how carefully to kind of create this kind of fisheye where something is clear but all the edges are blurred. Of course, I did that. And also, I taught for more than 30 years, and I wrote that book. And you know what? None of my colleagues and none of my pupils took advantage of that moment to make a complaint about me. And yet they could have got great credit on social media if they had. Instead, they all stuck up for me in public. They wrote to me in private. They tweeted, all of them. Even, I had people write to me about subsections of that book that go right back for 25 years. So I think, and wrote to tell me about it.
Do you think, I was thinking about, so you were basically called upon to renounce your own book, or to learn lessons. I
was asked by the sensitivity reader who appeared on Anatomy of Cancellation that I should write an introduction in which I apologised to Monisha Regis, Sunny Singh, and Shimin Suleiman for causing them so much trouble.
Yes, and
that should be in the book. That should be the introduction to the book.
But say, when because you've then republished or had the book
and Sunny
republished.
Singh suggested that England Poems from a School could be republished with an introduction by her.
Funny that. Yeah. But when it comes to writers standing by their work, I can't. Obviously, when you write a book and it's published, you don't then go back and continually rewrite it throughout your lifetime, do you? It has to stand at the time at which it was written.
It was also a bit annoying of him.
Who did?
W.H. Auden was always rewriting his poems. No, I don't think you should, and I don't think I should have been asked, which is why I, took back the rights for my book.
Yes.
All my books.
Because you need to be able to move on, presumably, to the next thing, which may have, you don't want to be forced to exhibit the lessons.
You just shouldn't,
God.
shouldn't be with a publisher that's going to do that with you. You shouldn't
Yes.
work with anyone that's going to treat you like that.
Yes. And did you get the impression that any other publishers walked away or were more wary of your publisher after the way they treated you?
Oh, I heard from lots of writers,
Mhm.
yeah. And a lot of writers protested to Picador, yeah.
Right.
Because it was a terrible way to treat a writer. I mean, one of the people that was most active against me within Pan Macmillan was Russell Brand's editor. And when Russell Brand was found to have done all the things that Russell Brand was found to do, that was treated. They made a very tiny announcement. They'd just be pausing his publishing.
Right.
They didn't denounce him or apologise for him.
Mm.
So she was running off to edit his book on mentoring young people, and then popping back to denounce me,
Wow.
in public.
And do you think then, I mean, so you said earlier about the sort of vulnerabilities that you allow to go into the text about yourself, and I did wonder when I was reading it, I thought, this is what they've seized on.
Yeah.
You almost open a little window of vulnerability by being quite honest about the doubts that you have about what you're doing, about how effective it could possibly be. You don't say, am I a white saviour? But there's that sense of, have I got an inflated sense of my own importance? Do I think I know these children? Whereas actually there's a whole other aspect of their life that I'll never know because it doesn't get brought into school. So that honesty that it's not honesty because it's writing, it's not just the simple truth, but there's a willingness to expose something that could then be seized upon. And they really did seize on those very points. And it was at that moment of the kind of Karen. And I do think there's a lot in there about seizing on you as a self-confessed white middle-class woman. And they almost say, look at you, you're a white middle-class woman.
Yeah, I know.
But do you think that it's partly because you said that about yourself? I mean, I know obviously that is
yes,
who you are,
I mean, I think that did open me to vulnerabilities. But, I wouldn't rewrite it any other way. And I wouldn't write non-fiction any other way.
Mm-hmm.
There's a vulnerable I in that book, and that's what makes it interesting. Otherwise it would be dishonest. But to write a book, I mean, I think that's what the sensitivity readers were trying to help me to do. Write a book that can't be criticised on Twitter. Write a book in which you appear virtuous at all times, in which you never have a non-progressive thought. Well, I wouldn't write my book that way, and I wouldn't write any book that way, because it's going to be awfully boring, quite obnoxious, boastful, untruthful. It has no merit. I mean, if you think about the article that started it all off, so I wrote a piece for The Guardian called The Very Quiet Foreign Girls Poetry Group, and all my sensitivity readers agreed this was absolutely terrible to have that there. But it's an irony. It's about these girls who appear to be very quiet and appear to be foreign, and in fact have very loud, clear voices. And if you have that ironic title, then the story keeps enacting itself. Here's the expectation, and what's the reality? Here's the question, have we got a stereotype here? And there's the answer, keeps happening. So it's an alive title, and it's an alive piece of writing. And there's no point in writing dead writing, however much you might be abused for it.
And do you think that because you are white and middle class, and at that moment in time there was a kind of antipathy towards that the irony was just ignored?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was about the abolition of irony, and that's really dangerous for all writers. You shouldn't be clapping people at the RSL about the abolishment of irony. You shouldn't be doing that. That's a really fundamental freedom. And certainly the Society of Authors shouldn't have been swinging in to join in on such fundamental things. So I think you would agree that words are intellectually and emotionally very, very powerful. Otherwise you wouldn't bother writing. But what about this idea that they're also politically powerful and harmful? Because that's what your critics were saying, isn't it? Harmful.
You are causing harm through the words that you chose to use.
But the harm is so, distant. It's on who am I harming? Well, they tried to say I was harming people that represented in the book, and I wasn't. nobody who actually was represented in the book. They scour. I think when they started, they thought they would find somebody who'd complained that I'd enslaved them on a poetry farm. No bother.
Mm-hmm.
I think they thought that they would find such a person. And I think they turned themselves into victims when they found that they couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's when they started the other story, that there wasn't such a person.
Yes.
But the idea that a misdescription causes harm, it's silly, and it underestimates readers. I mean, if the example's always used about some poor child who's deprived of the right things to look forward to in a library. And I agree with that. I mean, there's a thing in some kids about how we need much more diverse children's literature. It really does have a strong effect, and I'm glad that we are getting more diverse child literature. But children have got a huge capacity to invent and imagine and make use of what's in front of them. It's in the scale of harm. It's not the biggest harm. It's not. We can't be spending our energy on this.
Yes,
we've got to allow words which are imperfect and just get on with it. We can't. The progressive left cannot spend its time shooting children's writers in the hip in order to stop harmful words happening. I mean, it's happening. The cancellation happened at the same time as the Taliban retook Afghanistan. So my student Shukriya, the girl with the almond eyes, who wrote a marvellous article in the Times to defend me, she was writing her thesis about the genocide of her people, the Hazaras, and the Taliban were retaking Mazar al-Sharif. She had family members being held at gunpoint in a cellar. And that's harm and that's violence. And the only way she could get any traction to speak in public or say what was happening was through this thing that somebody had said that was harmful for me to have said, that she had almond eyes.
Yes, and so...
I mean, what's happened to her words? If you're saying that that's violence, where's her word for what happened to her uncle,
Yes, and lots of the children in your book, there is violence there, whether that's domestic violence in the home or whether that's witnessing very violent scenes elsewhere from the places from which they've fled, or just the general kind of violence that young teenage boys sort of start to have to navigate as they go through their teenage years. So why do you think... Well, where's the space then for poetry? If we're living in a time where lots of people can somehow come to believe that words are violence, then what is it that you think that poetry provides for those children, and why is it that you think it's so important to allow all children, not just the top sets, not just the kind of those who are seen as the most able or the most fluent or articulate, but that all children, if they're so inclined, that can get something from poetry? Because that can be seen as quite an airy-fairy idea and not very realistic, but actually your experience suggested that all children, or very many children
write poetry, and so many people, migrants, come from much more alive and strong and positive traditions of sharing poetry than we have here. Syrians, Afghans in particular, very strong traditions of oral poetry. I mean, Somalis know all their ancestors' names like a long poem, and they will be able to recite it for you. Many children from Sudan will be able to do the same thing. People have their whole hidden life of poetry. It's a very accessible thing. You can get people to write a poem in quite a short time if you frame it right. And it allows people who come from another language to express themselves in a very rich way. But I think what makes me a bit sad is that I found that the best way of getting people to write poems and write in general was to increase confidence over many years by telling them that they were worthwhile and giving them lots of forums to share and different frames for their work to show them how good it could be, and lots and lots of me saying, please put your own language in there, please put your own experience in there, we want to hear it. And I think the kind of criminalisation and calling down of that enterprise, and exactly that thing, the confidence, don't have confidence in what you say, saying those things could be very harmful and we will take it to bits and we will smash up your teacher. I think that is the opposite, and I found that in myself. I spent so much time building up confidence, and of course I lose confidence. And I think that many writers lose confidence. I think it's fingers over the keyboard is where the big damage has been done. That people are pausing and they're thinking, if I write this word, maybe I'll be shamed and punished and scapegoated. And that's the opposite of a healthy literary culture.
And I think you can see that in every part of life. So, when I was lecturing at University of Kent, and pretty much all of the more working class students there could not express themselves. And it wasn't necessarily because they lacked the words, but they lacked the confidence to know that they were allowed to say things in the way that they would naturally say them. And they had already, by the second year of university, realised that they didn't have the spontaneous way of speaking, the kind of new language, the new speak, that was suitable for the university context. And so trying to run seminars was almost impossible. And it wasn't just that, it wasn't that middle class students were silencing working class students. It was that staff from the very beginning, and the whole culture of the university had kind of, it wasn't just that they said, oh, this is a middle class place and therefore you don't have a language. It's that it's not just middle class. It's that there is a whole other new set of language. You must know Foucault. You must be able to talk about things like decolonisation or misogyny and these kind of terms that were not just alien to people because they could be made understandable, but they were just blunt and really crude tools that didn't work to explain the world to people. And then they lost the ability to speak. And yet they'd managed to get into universities. They presumably managed to express themselves on paper at some point.
They'd already been on quite a big journey.
Yeah.
I mean, I think confidence is so slow to build and such a precious thing and so easy to smash down. I mean, I always taught people to write by telling them that what they wrote was great over and over and over and over again before ever showing them. And I always found there's a lot of emphasis in English about doing redrafts, and it takes a long, long time for a child to learn to redraft. In fact, a year 9 is not capable of it. You have to be confident enough in your work and believe that it's worth it to properly redraft. And building that self-worth takes a long time. And it's so sad, this smashing down that's happened, because it's such a delicate thing. It's so quick to do and such a long time to repair.
And also writing is reading.
Yeah.
That's the thing I had to learn, was that actually most of the time, especially if you're doing academic writing, most of what you're doing is actually reading your own work, which is horrible.
And making sure it's clear. Yeah.
And that's the thing. Where
And having the confidence to do that is a big thing. Getting people to believe that they're good enough to do that.
Because it is profoundly uncomfortable, isn't it? Writing is some people don't feel that.
I find it extremely hard work. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you do, because I find it excruciating, and I always did. Let's see what questions we've got coming in. So, Sarah asks whether do you think that other authors will be able to find their way back into careers as published writers, or will they stay as truck drivers and other alternatives? She's thinking of Gillian Phillip there, as I think, a Free Speech Union member. And what steps do you think that publishing houses need to take to ensure that a breadth of voices are published?
I mean, I don't know. Gillian Phillip did something different from me. So she was part of a team that wrote these children's books. I don't know. I would hope that maybe Gillian can write her own book under her own name, and that there's a publisher that will publish it, because I'm sure she's great at what she does, and maybe she can write a book about truck driving. That would be fantastic. I hope that we're going through a moment where where that will be possible, where she would be re-signed by a mainstream publisher, and that her experiences will be interesting enough, to make that an attractive proposition. But publishing is still in a kind of in a very difficult moment. I think it's changing, but I think it is in a very difficult moment.
Do you worry that it will just move on to the next fad or the next sort of political set of restrictions?
Publishing has always been very faddish. I mean, I think that's a great publisher is great at spotting a great fad, aren't they? The publishers have always been a bit silly. That's part of what a publisher is a bit silly. How they got into this latest silliness. Well, I suppose lots of people did, but they took a very extreme form of it. I think there are structural problems. I mean, I've watched publishing shrink from the moment my first book was published. At first I was taken into very large buildings in Victoria with lots of sort of physical bits to them. There was copywriters, and there were lots of people were employed, like proofreaders that were actually employed by the publishing house. They'd been there for ages. They had very strong expertise. There was someone that clipped bits out of newspapers for the papers and sent them to you. There were editors that were very strongly trained. And I've watched that all shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink. I don't think nearly enough editing actually goes on anymore. I don't think editors are strong or confident. And then there's a generational gap, so that there is a group of people at the top who are obviously reluctant to give up what they've got. And then there is an awful lot of people who are not very well paid, who are doing it because it's a nice job. And then young people who kind of went into publishing because it looked like a nice job, and who were looking for a cause. So you've got a kind of a top and a discontented bottom, and that's a recipe for a mobbing. That's a recipe in a big company for the top to curry favour with the bottom by mobbing someone in the middle.
Yes.
And I think the middle is quite often a writer.
Yes. We did an interview with Adam Taylor, who's written a book about the American publishing industry, and that conflict between top and bottom, where they're kind of stripping out of the professional layers in the middle.
So there's a top and there's a bottom, and there's not a lot else. Yeah. And certainly that matched what happened to me.
Okay, Alan asks, he's asking about whether we need new laws that provide redress and damages where people suffer a loss by being cancelled.
I think if we're going to have a new law, I was thinking about this on the way here. The best new law we could have is that we need to abolish anonymity on Twitter and elsewhere, so that everybody is themselves, and on Goodreads, so that people can't lie, so that people are... Because we have got quite okay laws, people being liable for their words, but we have to make people liable for them.
Although those people who really piled onto you were not anonymous. I mean...
No, and actually, in retrospect, I could have sued them. But at the time, it was quite sad. I did a big social media report at one point, a forensic detective, to find out what had happened. And that was more than a year later. But she told me to make police reports. She'd never seen such abuse. And she'd been 30 years looking at, real abuse. Never seen such harassment. But I'd been so convinced by that time that I was the bad person that I didn't. I didn't sue because I believed I was to blame. And I believed some of that story, that other people were being harassed and not me. But that wasn't true. I was being harassed, actually. I was being harassed very badly.
Do you have any sympathy for to the extent that there was any kind of counter-pylon to your original detractors?
I don't think there was a counter-pylon at all. I've been quite satisfied with that. I believe that they got nothing but profit and credit for it. But that doesn't mean that I'm not sympathetic to them, and I don't believe that they weren't upset, because I believe they were. I'm sure, for example, that Shamefully didn't intend to do the damage that she did. I think she went in there, and it's scary. Success is scary, if I can express that. I mean, I've had tweets that have had 48,000 likes and things like that. It's quite scary. You feel the big... You feel you're on a very big horse. You feel the army move underneath you. It's frightening. It's like being in a dream. And I imagine that they would have experienced that, and I'm sympathetic to that extent.
Do you think writers should just stay off Twitter? I mean, is that a pressure from publishing, the business side of it, to be on Twitter in the first place, or do you think there are merits to it?
Oh, well, I mean, I had to sign that I was... I mean, when I used the Twitter to put out the children's poems, there was a kind of lovely virtuous circle. The young people were in contact with real poets. Poets would write back to them. People would praise their poems, which just gave them immense confidence and immense purpose. They wanted... Because everyone wants to be heard. And so they were writing to be heard, and people heard them and people commented on them. And that just made them write many more poems. It was lovely. It was a kind of mini publishing school where people were being heard and people were communicating, and they were telling people things. They got unexpected opportunities. It was a lovely thing. But I think the confidence in that I don't think anyone's going to be able to do that again either.
But that's interesting. There is the democratizing aspect of social media,
which can be very nice. You can hear a voice.
Yeah, and Mike asks. So you've described the worst of the abuse that you suffered. What was the best of the support?
I didn't get a vast amount of support, I have to say.
Mm-hmm.
But my friend Luke stood by me. All my students. That's what was the best of my support. They were just amazing. And the letter to the bookseller is a masterpiece. It's so beautifully written and so perfectly thought out and so perfectly timed. And Shukriya's article in the Sunday Times is brilliant. And Sonia Soda also stuck up for me at a very, very crucial moment, which was very brave of her. She took a lot of abuse. So, those were very good bits of support, and I'm very grateful for them.
What do you think, because obviously so many of our members have themselves experienced a fraction of what you experienced, but nevertheless, cancellation at a local level, at their work level, that the willingness of people around you who you thought knew you to believe the worst accusations, how do people come back from that, do you think? Or
I don't know, the more closer it is, the better. I should have said that Rachel Rooney was extremely brave and supported me.
The children's poet, yeah.
And a cartoon dog called David, who I believe actually was my second in department from my first job, but I'm not sure.
Right. This was on Twitter, so it was like a little avatar. Actually, I think somebody pointed out to you the other day it was actually a monkey, not a dog.
I now believe I've always believed he was a dog, so I'm sticking with that. But my old colleagues, my current colleagues, my students, all the people that knew me. But I think correspondingly, the things that hurt the worst actually are your friends, and it's the betrayal from your friends. That it's like a great wound in your trust, and you're never the same, and you can never repair the relationship of somebody that they think it'll be expedient, they think Kate will understand, and they ring you up and tell you that you'll understand, but it's irreparable. If somebody betrays you in those ways, you can't ever really come back from it. Something has been destroyed. And
is that because they reveal to you that they don't actually know you, or is it that you think they do know you, but they're prepared? Even then, they're prepared to
just that your good self is unreal. So I think when you, especially later in life, you form a trust with a friend and you trust them, and you both believe in your best selves. And I think you all believe that about a friend. You'll always be, oh well, he's a good sort. If I had my back against the wall, they'd definitely be there. Well, my back was against the wall and they definitely weren't. And I think that they also, it is an injury that also goes into them because everyone believes that they would behave better. So this was kind of a literary dispute. So everyone read 1984 and they will definitely believe that they would stand up to O'Brien. But they didn't for a minute.
No.
They gave in immediately. So they've let themselves down and they've got to know their worst self. And nobody wants to know their worst self, and nobody wants to know the person that introduced them to their worst self. So, you become a kind of carrier of shame, a carrier of bad memories, a carrier of worse selves. So nobody wants to see you, and that's another kind of secondary shunning that goes on.
And so you introduced 1984, so that segues poetically into a question which is Graham says, so cancellation by social justice HR departments, we can say publishing, is part of the soft totalitarianism part of the soft totalitarianism taking hold in the US, UK and elsewhere. Although there has been some pushback and some victories for free speech, what more can we ordinary folk do to re-establish freedom of speech and expression?
I don't know. It's very hard. I'm doing my best by getting out there and talking about it. I think I honestly think if we abolished HR overnight, that could be a good thing.
That seems to be a gathering momentum at the moment, that particular claim. It's come up in so many meetings over the last month.
I think it's a genuine problem. I think idealistic graduates going into HR not to help people with their contracts but to administer social justice, it's not a good place for social justice. Workplace. I think workplace needs to run fairly, but it needs to run fairly as a workplace.
Yes, for the people within the workplace.
in their work context.
Yes. Well, that's
doing their work.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Would it? Oh, okay. So John says, do you feel it would help to prevent this happening in the future if all the people who attacked you are named and held to account? Or do you want a public shaming in the village square? Might it prevent future attacks by the mob against writers, knowing that? Well, you did say about removing anonymity, but I mean, do you get the impression that the podcast and the apology to you, a little bit weak, I thought, to Kate and others?
I know. Well, I mean, I know various people have been saying, "Oh, well, name more names, whatever." Go after more people. I think everything's always going to be a bit broad brush. And that's something that I've had to kind of draw a deep breath and just try to keep accepting it, because of course I want, every individual named, and I want to say, and that thing that happened on the 14th of August at 2:30, that was absolutely unacceptable. People are never going to be interested in that level of detail. And I think the best thing that, that I'm going to achieve here is that broad brush people will see that maybe those things weren't true. Broad brush people will see that somebody can come back a bit, that things can be said to be not true, and that will open a helpful door. I can't hope for every single thing to be vindicated or changed. That's not going to work. For example, I saw a Substack the other day from a very popular Gen X person saying that even though I was clearly embittered and unlikable and really a very terrible person for Anatomy of Cancellation, nevertheless it was a little bit confronting. And I thought, well, actually, it's not nice to be called names by you, darling, but you've called me a lot of names already. And actually that's progress, because you've admitted that maybe a little bit of a mistake might have been made. And I think that's where you start. You start with just a big, it's like the Amichai poem, and from the place where we are right, nothing can grow. It's hard like a yard. We have to just get some cracks. We have to just get some mistakes and let some little plants come back.
So but I think reading quite a lot of the reviews of Anatomy of a Cancellation, there's a tendency for people to smooth over the cracks, which were very, very evident and widened massively during that thing that you experienced, and the sense that, oh well, that was a mad time, wasn't it? That was crazy. That was COVID. That was post George Floyd. But thank God, that we've moved on from that. And there is this desire, really strong desire, to sort of act as if we respond to these apocryphal stories and then learn all the lessons and then bounce onwards. Whereas, I mean, I find that really strange. Even very intelligent reviewers have made that point. It's very peculiar. It's worth a listen, but don't worry, it's not going to happen again. And you think it could happen together. It will happen tomorrow. It will, but there will be one tomorrow.
Well, if there starts one tomorrow, some people might be able to say, well, maybe we shouldn't do that thing again. In fact, I saw one begin to start. They started in on Ben Judah, on exactly the same way that they started in on me. And he's also a Picador author, and exactly the same. Oh, he'd written some phrases. Actually, I think his book was much more highly coloured than mine. And then people stopped. People said, oh, this is a bit like Kate Clanchy, let's not do that. And it just stopped. It didn't take off. Picador didn't join in, because I don't think that they will join in. I think I have made that difference. I do not think that a publisher will ever apologise for an author or hang them out to dry again as badly as they did me. They haven't done it since, and I don't believe that they will. I think that lesson has been learnt, and it made a huge difference that those institutions, and I'm going to say it again because they really got off lightly, the Society of Authors, which attacked me and positively attacked me. They didn't not help me. They positively persecuted me. The Society of Authors is not going to persecute any more writers, and Picador and Pan Macmillan, and I don't think any of the big houses would ever do that again. They learnt that lesson. So I hope that institutional big thing has changed, and that's a good thing, isn't it? Yes.
Well, recognising that it isn't all about individuals with bad intent or who get carried away. It is about the institutional response.
There's always going to be nutters on the internet.
Yeah.
But the institutions need to stand firm. And in my case, the institution simply joined in.
Yes.
And I don't think that will happen again. So I think, well, in the next 5 years anyway. So I think that's something. I think that's a little brick in the wall.
But do you think that's very organic and maybe weak because of that? Does there need to be some kind of writing into the Constitution? I don't know.
I'm trying to write at the moment, and if any of you guys would get on my Substack and read it and pass it on, you'll see that I have done, some more detailed stuff, and other people trying to write about it. So maybe I'll even write a whole book. I don't know. We'll see.
What's the best book you've read about a cancellation?
The First Stone by Helen Garner, which was written in the 90s. Right. She's
I don't know.
I'm a huge Helen Garner fan. She just won the Bailey Gifford.
Okay.
So she wrote. She got cancelled for it in the scale of the 90s. In the 1990s, it's about a sexual harassment case, and she's sympathetic to the guy who's accused. Right. That's the position that she starts, and she has this marvellously vulnerable eye, because Helen Garner invented the vulnerable eye, the person who's constantly scouring herself for faults. And it's a marvellously alive and humorous book, so you could start with that one.
Great. What's it called? The First Stone by Helen Garner. Oh, wow. Great. The one I've read it 2 or 3 times now is Mark Lawson's The Allegations, which was really early, and it's a novel, and it really captured the momentum that's built and the betrayals amongst friends and the turning of an institution against you. One of the characters is cancelled within academia and the other is cancelled within the media. And I found it phenomenal. But
also, all of the Salem witch trials.
Yes.
Are very germane, and I've read, not when I went to the Crucible, but I've also done a lot of reading about it. It's a marvellously well documented period, and that is simply what happened.
Yes,
it's exactly what happened.
Yes. And then the other one is Philip Roth's The Human Stain.
Yeah, it's also a good book.
Yeah, which again really early on captured that one word that's uttered and is then just turned against the professor. It's one of those books you can't talk about because it gives away the whole far too many brilliant twists in the plot. But that's something I've read a couple of times that was so insightful. What's the name of your Substack?
It's called Kate's Substack. Just look up my name, Kate Clanchy.
Okay, that was Brian's question. But you did spend money on a private investigator to try and look at the evidence on social media of whether the people who went after you did actually suffer, and how the timeline of.
I was too late by that point.
Yeah. And also, do you really surely you want to be free to write?
Yeah, I mean, I'm at peace with what I've done, and I think if I hadn't done the research and spent the time, that I wouldn't have been able to, bring it to the public attention and the podcast. So, I mean, I don't know what I've done in the last 4 years. It's quite a lot of it I have spent looking at a wall, to be quite honest. But I think I have also done some useful research, and that I've got a voice now, and I'm able to write a bit now.
Well, I think that anybody who does what you've done by remaining public when actually what your tormentors are demanding is that you run away and cease to have your public life.
I mean, I do find that is she cancelled? I can still hear her talking stuff very obnoxious.
Yes.
I mean, what do they mean? Is she still alive? Yes, I am.
Yes. What a person. How can she not accept her depersoning? Yeah. It's extraordinary, isn't it? Do they really want somebody crushed and disappearing?
But then they don't want the shade of shame to come back on them. It's so much about shame. It's kind of sort of primitive stuff about pushing shame away, and they don't want the shame to come back on them. So they want you to stop existing. And they have to deny their suffering, otherwise they start to feel bad. They have to deny that you're suffering.
What do you think shame is? I mean,
it's really strong, primitive human emotion that we all push around between us. Anyone who's been to a marriage counsellor knows about that. It's strong everywhere, and it can multiply. And when people are lonely, people were terribly lonely in the pandemic, and they started to mistake their online selves for themselves, and we got these terrible results. I mean, that's not me saying, it's all madness, it's all in the past, but I think those were genuinely things that were there.
Yes. No, I do think the COVID, well, it was more than a moment, wasn't it? It was much longer than that.
It's dreadful, yeah.
But the madness of that was
awful,
a factor.
yeah. The lockdown and the repression, and I was trying to take care of both my dying parents through lockdown. It was a terrible, terrible, lonely experience.
Yeah, I remember.
And very silencing, a huge amount of propaganda, very, very difficult to question what was happening. My father wanted to question very much that he was locked up, and I did as well. It's really, and the pressure to say nothing, pressure to agree that this was the best course, which I'm not in any way convinced it was, and I never was at the time either.
Well, and I think that this is, I think without lockdown, the Free Speech Union wouldn't exist in the way it does. I mean, so many people who became members in that we launched in March 2020.
Because you've been locked up.
Yes. Yeah. And I think the positive side of it was this kind of reaction to it, albeit one that we had to only express through virtual means. But it's not gone anywhere, thankfully. We've turned it into something. Well, lots of really positive, very, very warm responses to you, Kate. People commending your bravery and saying they haven't got a question, but they just want to applaud you for your eloquent, measured and sane response. And I'm just going to see if there's one last... Oh, well, maybe we should ask a question about sensitivity readers. I mean, I know, they always come up.
Yeah, people are fascinated by them, which is quite right. They are a fascinating social phenomenon.
Well, in the podcast, there is one episode that speaks at length to the woman.
Yeah, no, I think that was brave of her to name herself. I should say, I always knew her. I always knew her name. I was never clear that that's what she consented to, so I always kept her anonymity, and I wrote to her to make sure that I'm allowed to say her name. What about my sensitivity readers? What terrible thing are they guilty of now?
Do you think they should be abolished? Is it a form of censorship? I mean, was that something? Did you consent to a sensitivity reader?
Well, you see, I mistook them for an editor, and I think that they are in a way a kind of editor. I don't think editors should be abolished. I think that editors are extremely important, and so are fact checkers, and that books should exist. They should be richly edited. I think we're all sick of unedited content, and we need lots of editors and people that care. But sensitivity readers, as they are, kind of professional bad faith readers.
Yes,
and they go through looking for offence. And I just think that that's never constructive. I think the whole basis that they own a special experience is untrue.
Yes.
I think that as they exist as a freelance body, I think they're exploited and underpaid, and it doesn't do them any good either. I think that we should have bigger, go back to the bigger, stronger publishing houses that know what they're doing, and proper fact checkers and proper editors that have got time to edit. But remove this idea that a bad faith reading, that looking for a half of a sentence that might give somebody offence, is those can go.
Yes, because I think Adam Taylor wrote about this, and how there was this little flourishing subsection of the publishing industry for sensitivity readers to establish themselves, but each one had to have a niche authority based on their own identity or their claim to an identity. And I noticed actually people are playing fast and loose with their own identities, aren't they? So I noticed in the podcast, I was Googling some of the people who were speaking, and one chap who, speaks as though he's coming from a kind of black oppressed minority in British life. You Google him, and he's Cypriot.
Well, he's a son of a chartered accountant.
And could pass in any setting for being whichever ethnicity he wanted to be, and yet he's speaking about you as if you're this kind of top of the white supremacy tree, and he's so horrified by what you've said. And I thought, you found a niche, mate. And there's so many of these people that have found their own little sliver of the publishing industry in the last 5 years, based purely on...
It's quite interesting, Helen Gould, that she was brought in to look for the race things, but actually she spent most of her time commenting on the 1980s in Scotland and white children.
Right.
And which, honestly, I've got more knowledge of that than she has, because she wasn't even born. So it was just, where can we find offence and pretend that we fainted, I think.
Yes. Yes, when I thought to start with, I thought, oh no, she's making some reasonable points. And then at a certain point, she drifted into this politicised language that has got no place in editing.
And I think also denying that she was a censor is absolutely untrue. I mean, she didn't make clear in that podcast that she did have a power of life and death over that manuscript. And what she suggested was that the book be republished with an apology to Monisha Rajesh, Shemin Suleiman and Sunny Singh at the front. That was her suggestion. And without that, my publishers were discussing, just letting all my books go out of print. And I think that would have been an absurd thing to do. All the apology. I think can we abolish apologies? They're not apologies, they're degradation ceremonies,
Yes. And finally, what do you get any information about whether your books are sitting in school libraries now? Is there any pressure from staff to not have them there?
I've never heard of that. I mean, I think some kids wouldn't have been in many school libraries anyway because it's a book for adults.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I think that if England Poems from a School has been removed from school libraries, then that's very sad because there's nothing that young people like to read more than their own peers. Mm-hmm. I think it's unlikely. It's a pretty book. I think if it's there, it will probably still be there.
But you haven't heard of people saying, "Oh, isn't she that problematic?"
Well, I mean, probably they have. But I know that lots of teachers still write to me and say that they still jolly well like it, and they feel oppressed by being told not to like it. The podcast, I mean, it's sold quite a lot more books, so that's good.
Yes, I did assume that would be the case.
Yeah.
So, no, because I hadn't read the book.
You hadn't read the book?
No.
Nobody had read the book. That was a great feature, including my publisher. Nobody read it.
Well, it's the sort of thing I sort of thought, oh, this is kind of Guardian-y when it first came out.
But it's not. It's much more thoughtful than
that. I know.
That.
Well, of course, when I read it, I didn't think that. I thought, well, this is actually at this moment in time when there's so much talk about immigration and asylum seekers in a way that obviously lots of legitimate questions being asked about policy, but it slips really easily into a very, very dehumanising view, and including of teenagers and children. And so I actually think the book is a really helpful corrective, just individually, actually, reading it. I just thought, oh, okay, yes, remember that.
It's not a Guardian-y, it's not a straight down the line lefty book, and that's what got it into trouble. But it doesn't pander to any of those other things either. It does insist on things being difficult. And that's what got me into trouble. Don't say anything difficult. Don't make any jokes.
No. Well, we've got some people who've got recommendations for additional reading. Helen Garner, The First Stone, and then of course Some Kids I Taught and What They Taught Me, and then Kate's Substack called Kate's Substack. And then also I'd recommend you have a listen to Anatomy of a Cancellation, because there's lessons in there about all cancellations. I think it's not just your cancellation, and it's very many others, and it will be very familiar to members who've experienced it themselves, but also who've read numerous cases that we've brought to the public eye of people being cancelled. So I just want to say thank you very much, Kate, for joining us, making the time to come and sit in this little kind of caravan type booth that we've got. And people can catch up, watch it again, share the video of this event when it's on YouTube, probably early next week. Thanks very much for joining us.